Hey everybody, welcome to what I believe is the final session of the day. I have the enviable position being between you and happy hour, so try to keep it engaging here. So we're going to be talking about, we're going to go through a practical guide to accelerating website optimization. A little bit about me. I've been in web for about 13 years, with 10 years of those being in-house for SaaS companies. I am currently the director of web strategy for Vanta, a leader in the security and compliance automation space. And throughout this time, I've been focused on building highly performant web teams. So today we're going to be going over some guiding principles for web teams, specifically in-house web teams that are looking to really drive significant value for their businesses. We're going to look at an uncommon data source that a lot of people don't leverage, specifically around CRO. We want to talk about psychology and the role that various psychological principles play in CRO. And then ultimately talk about the power of Webflow. We're all here to learn more about Webflow, so I want to make sure we talk about that as well. So here are 3 guiding principles for web teams. Web teams should be performance-focused. Now, when I say performance, I'm not talking about technical performance, site speed, loading, etc. I'm talking about a shift from the traditional model of web teams being fulfillment, internal agency teams for the other teams within marketing. I'm talking about shifting away from that model and focusing on building web teams that are focused on performance and becoming lead-generating, revenue-driving performance machines. This model the traditional model naturally restricts a web team's ability to influence change and drive growth for their businesses. And so the closer web teams are to growth and to growth initiatives, the more impactful they will be. The second guiding principle here is the most immediate impact that web teams can have is by improving their ability to capture demand. Capture is the key word there. I'm not saying generate, I'm not saying build, capture demand. The shift here is focusing on capitalizing on the demand that other channels are driving to your website. Web teams need to have longer-term initiatives that are focused on building evergreen value, on building that lasting value of self-sourced demand and growth. But when focusing on the near term, capturing demand generated and driven to the site by other marketing channels is the quickest path to realizing value through your web team. Now, third and final here, there are no best practices, there are only good practices. This has been a core philosophy of mine ever since my early days in college as a jazz musician. I took a hard pivot at that point, going the business marketing direction, but Miles Davis was famously quoted as saying, "Do not fear mistakes, there are none." He was also famously quoted saying, "There are no wrong notes." I don't know that I would go so far as to say in marketing that there are no mistakes. I've experienced and done my own number of mistakes. But an important tenet of jazz music is you learn the rules well enough to know when, and more importantly, how to break those rules. And the same stands for marketing teams, web teams in particular. The most important thing is testing and making sure that when you're testing to learn. People are terrified of making mistakes and having losing variations, losing experiments, but you can almost always learn as much from those as you can from the wins that you have and the winning variations. So let's talk about data sources for a minute. We have to start here. I don't have time to turn this into a group therapy session. We all hate GA4. We all use GA4. It's a terrible thing, but most web teams that I've worked for or led, we all use Google Analytics as the core data source for learning more about our users. You then layer on some behavioral analytics. I personally was very excited to see Webflow Analyze, and I can't wait to replace this layer with what Webflow Analyze is bringing to the table. You then layer on another fun announcement today, Webflow Optimize at the top here, but learning from your past experiments, all of the test data you have is a fantastic data source. And then finally, some first-party, often more anecdotal, but still useful data from user surveys about your website. So a data source that many of you may not be using, I know I wasn't using until a handful of years ago, is Google Search Console. And the paid counterpart here being Google Ads. But the biggest difference here between this tool and other tools is that you get real insight into what queries your users searched that brought them to your website. That shines a light on their intent much stronger than what page they landed on, because any number of reasons could have driven them to that product page, to that solution page, to that blog post. But when you know the actual words that they used, that gives you that much more depth of understanding of their intent when they came in. And then traditionally, keyword intent is mapped to these 4 different categories. And you can, again, glean some additional insight there. But one thing that people don't tend to look at is when you look at the stage of funnel, are these people top of funnel, middle of funnel, or bottom of funnel? And when you can merge these traditional keyword intent types with more personalized, company-specific funnel stages, then you can really take that to the next level. So let's look at a real example from my time when I owned the website at Divi. This was our credit product page, and we consistently were converting users on this page at about 3% conversion rate. That was, pretty flatline for most of the time. We ran a number of tests, all of your standard tests, everything we heard earlier in different sessions, testing the messaging, the copy, the CTA, the product image. Everything we tested remained relatively flatline. We couldn't really move the needle here. So went a little bit deeper and found that organic search was driving the vast majority of traffic to this page. It was the second most trafficked page on the site, and so it was the biggest opportunity, but we took that look and found that it was organic search that was driving the majority of that traffic. Brings me back to this new data source that we just talked about, Google Search Console, to do a little bit deeper research. And so we found that the top keywords driving users to this page were Divi Credit, Divi Credit Card, Divi Corporate Card, Divi Line of Credit. You can see the consistent element here is Divi. So when we go back to the keyword intents, these users were sitting comfortably in the commercial intent. They were sitting comfortably middle to bottom of funnel. These users were actively looking for business credit. They knew who Divi was, that Divi provided business credit, and they were likely further down the funnel than other users. And so what we really found was that this page was serving almost as a secondary homepage. It was heavily branded traffic. They knew the company, they knew the product, and so their likelihood to convert was much higher than other users. So the hypothesis at this point centered around how do we remove a number of steps to be able to convert these users more immediately on landing, because we could match their intent to the intent to convert and to do business with Divi. So the first experiment we ran was very successful. We saw nearly 170% increase in conversion rate at a very high confidence. And that was, we ran that test. We placed the form on the page. So we removed those steps that were keeping a user from being able to immediately convert. And then we ran a follow-up test, which was even more exciting. And this screenshot shows the experience there, where we actually placed the form in the hero rather than the first experiment, which placed the form in the footer on the page. And this second experiment was plus 93% delta from what was already a very successful experiment. And when you compare that back to the original, it was plus 445% delta, which is stupid. We validated these results. We talked about it. We picked it apart. We dug into it as much as we could, because you don't get nearly 450% lift on experiments. It just doesn't happen. So that was a very fun experiment. And when you fast forward for the next couple of years that this page was largely remained the same experience, it was consistently converting at 17 to 20% conversion rate, which again, for organic traffic, personally, I hadn't seen that in the past, and since mirroring this has been a challenge, and so we were very excited to be able to capitalize on this traffic in such a way that was lucrative for the business moving forward. So some key takeaways here. Expand your data sources. Look for whatever data sources you can to mine into the actual intent that your users have when they are coming to your website. align that on-page UX with that intent. These users gave signals through their search queries that they were ready and willing to convert. And so we aligned that on-page UX and had huge dividends. And then ultimately, CRO 101, reduce the number of actions you're requiring from your users to convert. Remove the requirement to click, remove the requirement to scroll through the page before they have an opportunity to convert. If you know that those users are ready and they are middle to bottom of funnel, put that conversion point in front of them. So let's talk about psychology in CRO. There's a number of psychological principles that play at every stage of CRO. I'm not going to go too deep into each of these principles, but we are all exposed to these different principles in our own decision-making every day. So why is psychological principles so powerful? I think it comes down to three things: ubiquity, flexibility, and scalability. These principles are ubiquitous. They are present in every piece of human decision-making, including every interaction on your website. They're flexible because it applies generally the same to everybody. It manifests in different ways, but if you're able to capitalize on each of these different principles, it is applicable to your disparate audiences, segments, and then the scalability. Because of the ubiquitous nature, it allows you to scale these principles and the findings of your experiments with leveraging these principles across a number of channels and touch points, and you can get significant gain from learning more about these. So today I want to focus on two specific principles that I see as very closely related, and that's Hick's law and the cognitive load theory. We won't go too deep on the detailed definitions, and there's tons of research behind each of these, but Hick's law mostly talks about the time to make a decision and the impact that the number of decisions has on decision making. And so the one thing that isn't listed here is that many users will just opt out of making a decision at all if you put too many decisions in front of the user. It's the whole idea of the paradox of choice. And then the cognitive load theory is all about the amount of mental effort required to process information. So similarly, overly complex designs and decision trees can lead to users feeling overwhelmed and, again, leave your site without taking an action, without making that decision. So let's look at Google. This is Google circa 2001. It's terrible. The current UI doesn't look anything like this. Users were immediately exposed to more than a dozen different pathways to do something as simple as put in a Google search. There's a reason that this UI doesn't look this way anymore and looks like this. There's a clean search bar that gives users a very clear path and direction as to what Google wants them to do. And a user doesn't need to select local. A user doesn't need to indicate that they want to do an image search or that they're looking for a video. Google has internalized all of that chaos that you saw on the previous slide and understands the user well enough to know what their intent is when they're searching for a restaurant near them or searching for a movie trailer or what have you. They understand that user intent and they deliver on it in the cleanest and easiest way possible. Internalizing that chaos and picking your user's journey for them is the best way to get users to continue to engage. Now let's look at a less effective example. Now I'll put the caveat out here. MailChimp is a fantastic product. They just have some opportunities to improve their conversion experience. So this is their marketing automation tools landing page. When a user lands here, you're immediately given the opportunity to get started, start your trial, chat with us, call the team for some reason. I don't remember the last time I picked up my phone and called a sales team, or a different way to start a trial. So you can see how the language is different in each of these pathways. You're giving so many different ways and modes to engage with the team. It gets worse. If I click Get Started, if I click Start Your Trial, if I click the top banner to start your trial just a different way, I'm brought to this page. Remember that I clicked on a CTA on the Marketing Automations tool page. Can anyone guess what word does not show up a single time on the entirety of this page? Marketing automation tools. I'm immediately exposed to email and SMS, to website, to all of the disparate pieces of the MailChimp product suite, but not the thing that I had just given intent to convert on. Let's contrast this experience with an example from JupyterOne. So this is their CASM platform product page. There's clean copy, good product visual, and 2 CTAs, both of which are the same. It's the same CTA. There is another psychological principle they're leveraging in the nav bar, the escalation of commitment, get a user to take an initial action, and they're more likely to take the subsequent actions. It's a different principle. We're not talking about that today. But this is the page that, if you click either of those CTAs, you're brought here. You're not exposed to any additional product information. You're not exposed to any other competing pathways. You're immediately brought into a form with an obfuscated product UI in the background to allude to the demo that you're about to experience. It's a very clear, clean pathway from intent to convert to the conversion opportunity. Let's look at Webflow. Another fantastic example. Good job, Webflow team. There are 2 CTAs here as well, with a secondary CTA that piqued my interest as I was going through this. But you have get started and you have get started. 2, again, very clear pathways to convert from this page. And then I mentioned my interest was piqued by the secondary CTA there of Webflow University. So Webflow has taken it to the next step and knew that I was a customer and wanted to make sure that I also had the opportunity to engage as a customer and learn more about the product. So I went incognito. Oh, we're going to jump through this. I went incognito and saw that they were personalizing my experience. They knew that I was a customer. They gave me that secondary CTA. But for users who are not known customers, they're given a cleaner, even cleaner example with 2 get started CTAs. And in this case, similar to JupyterOne, I click any of those CTAs, and I'm again brought into a clean conversion flow, heavy focus on the form and that primary CTA, that primary next step that I've already shown that I am interested in taking, with a clean product visual to help users get through that next step. So going back to Vanta, my current company, we've leveraged similar understanding of Hicks' law, of the cognitive load theory, and mirrored the experience that we built at Divvy's site and seen similar results here. We updated our product library, and we've seen significant improvement in conversion rate across the board for all of our product pages. We have a number of follow-up experiments that we are looking to explore, similar to the JupyterOne example, similar to the Webflow example. So form in the hero for all of those who have working relationships with their design team. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing. It is, in my experience, the one that has converted the best. But there are a number of different iterations, like JupyterOne, like Webflow, that can have similar results as long as you keep the key elements in mind of keeping the pathway as consistent and streamlined and focused as possible on that next step that you want your users to take. So let's talk more about Webflow. Webflow plays a transformative role in all aspects of website management, and experimentation is no different. The true power that Webflow brings to CRO comes from components, CMS, and variables. All of this is possible. Everything we just talked about is possible on any platform. Everything you do in how we manage websites, build websites, but Webflow makes it easier, faster, and to use the tagline that I hadn't heard before today, better to build together. It brings these disparate teams together in a way and really delivers on the idea of dev superpowers. So this is looking at the traditional model of experimentation. This is a little reductive, but does represent the traditional model of you have 2 different versions of a page, you run those variations, and you deliver on whatever that winning variation was. You relaunch your page with that winning variation. This restricts the scale of any given experiment. When you look at how you can run it in Webflow, and I should say this is independent of everything we heard today about Webflow Optimize and Optimize AI and all of the amazing tools that are coming. Even without that, this is already possible. And running the same exact experiment from the traditional model, Webflow allows you to take that same experience, but opens the ability to scale those findings to an entire collection of landing pages that leverage the same template, or update that component across your entire website when you can prove out that it performs better than the original model at the click of a button. With no additional dev overhead to be able to make that update. You update it one place, it updates everywhere. You update that one collection template page, and it updates the entire collection. And this is something that we have also used at Vanta to great success, being able to remove the navigation from paid landing pages, test it one place, validate it on maybe 2 or 3 other pages, and then you roll it out and see the significant gain across the board. So some final takeaways here. Map your CTAs. Understand what the next step is that you want your users to take at any point. Pick your user's journey for them. They really need the help. Users are stupid. I'm just going to say it. You need to help them. Pick their journey for them. And ultimately, again, going to kind of CRO 101, reduce the number of decisions that you're inflicting on your users. Be more like Google. Be less like MailChimp. Any questions?
So interested in kind of learning more about how these insights kind of get shared with the design team, and how that communication goes. If it's a brief, what that communication is like between those teams.
So the insights that we find when we build the experiments, or results from the experiments?
Both.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest thing in my experience is just having that, building a level of trust between the teams and having open dialogue. It's really helpful when you have a forcing function of a recurring session between those teams, so that it is that forcing function of not having to schedule a one-off meeting because you want to run a test. Building that experiment-driven culture of knowing that we're going to be testing always. And so it's that open dialogue, bi-directional, that you can easily circle back, and they know the experiments that are upcoming, they know the experiments that were just run, and then building that culture of communication across the department as well, so that it's not just the design team that learns that, but also your growth team. If you have people running campaigns, if you have other demand gen teams who you're actively testing on their pages, making sure that it's just that communication and feedback cycle to say, hey, our new best practice is we use forms in this way. This CTA now outperforms this button color, whatever the experiments are that you're running, but actually circling back with that feedback loop. And inevitably, you will have points of friction when you do find that balance between how do you make a beautiful website highly performant, and understanding, like for us, performance is the North Star. And so how do we find that North Star and then iterate as much as possible to make it also as beautiful as possible?
Thank you.
Yeah. I think there's another right here.
Hi, Jose. This might be putting you on the spot a little bit too much, but I'm curious, besides Hick's Law and I forget the name of the other one, if any of the other principles, if you have stories about how those kind of played into some of the tests that you did. And if that's putting you on the spot too much, maybe you just have another fun experiment to share that we could learn from.
Not putting me on the spot too much at all. One that we've used consistently, specifically with time-gated events and promotions and different things like that, is if you're familiar with Opt-in Monster or similar tools that give you the opportunity to do pop-ups and exit intent and all of that. A lot of those tools come with built-in countdown timers. So a sense of urgency is one of those principles where it's important to find the balance between, we've run those countdown timers when there was a webinar that was a month away. Turns out when you say that you have 30 days to register for a webinar, it's not that urgent. But if you say this webinar goes live in 2 hours, this webinar goes live in 4 hours, whatever that window is. But a sense of urgency is a very powerful tool that I've used in the past as well. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. That was great.
Yeah.
One question that I face is that as I proportionally increase demo conversions, same thing with you, I also see a lot I also see not a quite proportional, but similar decrease in people who never show up to that call. So I convince them to hit that button. That button is very shiny. They sign it, and they never show up to speak to my sales team. I'm curious. One thing that I'm wondering about is if I am over-influencing people towards a demo request before they've had a chance to explore and get bought in. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that from these sort of psychological principles perspective, or if you think there's any merit to that.
Yeah, I think that can be a pretty common thing as you increase the scale, especially if you're doing it at a significant rate. I think the rate of, spam submissions, the rate of less relevant, you're putting that opportunity in front of more and more users. And so while the rate of, interested parties will also increase, the rate of people just kind of kicking the tires will also proportionally increase. I think this is another opportunity for cross-functional interaction, thinking about like life cycle team as the example, where if you do see that significant drop off, then there's an opportunity to look at what are your autoresponders look like, how much are you leveraging that for education. Another way, something that we do on the Vanta website is we actually give them the opportunity to schedule their own demos right then in the moment. And that's something that I've seen. We ran this at Divvy as well, using another software called Chili Piper, where after the conversion, it immediately loads your sales team's calendars and puts it in front of them. And that is another lever that we've been able to pull to reduce the amount of no-shows, because it gives your user more control of their own destiny. If you are waiting for your sales team to reach out, there's a lot of studies in the market about like literally minutes. If it goes beyond those minutes of them reaching out to schedule, the likelihood of a demo attendance drops off significantly. And so I think it's looking at what are the tech solutions? Do we need a Chili Piper? Do we need a Calendly integration? Or how do we work with our lifecycle team? How do we work with our sales team to make sure that those leads that come in hot aren't left to cool down, that they are actually executed on as quickly as possible?
Hello, Rohit the Poet here. I guess kind of like a similar theme to the previous question. What sort of lagging metric would you recommend for sort of like demo completions? Would it be like a sales accepted lead or opportunity close sort of thing? Because I get some feedback from different leaders in the org, like, well, marketers, they can only control so much leading up to the lead, and it's really, you're at the contingency of what sales does with it.
Yeah, I would basically echo what you said. There is, marketing has influence until we don't, especially like web focused. And so I would say similarly, the life cycle team does have more lasting control as you go beyond that. The marketing team at Vanta, we do have the actual form submissions, the demo requests, but then MQLs, and making sure that there's certain firmographic requirements for those leads to actually MQL. If we have a massive spike in demos that never actually MQL, then there's a problem there in quality, because the way that we're set up, they can MQL immediately. And so if you see that disparity, then there's a problem we can control, because there's something in how we're promoting it, the people that we're converting, that's a clear gap in quality. Whereas if we get them through, they go through MQL, they do get into the demo stage, and then they fall off, every team I think needs to draw a line in the sand and say, we're kind of responsible to hear. Obviously, everyone in the company wants close one, but your regime, your control goes, put a bound around it and make sure that the things that you can control and the indications of quality and those different things are that you have those insights so that you can adjust accordingly. But it's borrowing trouble to say, as the web guy, I'm responsible for close one, because the number of variables between here and there are just too significant. Thank you all.